get started. I apologize. Hello, everybody. Sorry, just working out the kinks here. We were just joking. We were having some technical problems with our digital hoarding chat here this afternoon. So I'm really happy to have you here. I am going to attempt to share my screen if I can figure out how to do that. I'm going to be chatting with you a little bit more about digital hoarding. And let's see here. I'm trying to see where I share my screen. I'd like to share my slides with you. There it is. Okay. So let me start from the beginning. Okay. And hopefully you all can see this. This will work for me here. Wonderful. All right. So welcome everyone to information and digital hoarding. This is something that I've been interested in for quite some time and have noticed it even when I first started working with folks struggling with hoarding disorder, which was about 21 years ago. So this is nothing new. However, it is something that we're starting to see people talk more and more about. And so I'm really excited to be on here today with you all to talk about information and digital hoarding and just a little bit about what we're seeing with this type of hoarding behavior. So we'll go into some details if I can get my slides to advance. Okay, there we go. So what is information and digital hoarding? And this is something that, these are some of the terms that we commonly see if we're looking at this issue and what we'll see in research and also what we'll see oftentimes just newspaper articles and magazine articles. This is honestly where you'll see most of the information on digital hoarding. This is pretty new when it comes to research on this particular subtype. So we'll talk about it, but oftentimes this is talked about as information hoarding, digital hoarding, data hoarding, e-hoarding, or cyber hoarding are terms that have all been used to discuss this behavior. So what exactly are we looking at here? So kind of a working definition that I pieced together is excessive acquisition and difficulty discarding printed or digital information of limited perceived value, because what other people perceive that to be, which has resulted in distress, disorganization, digital and or physical clutter. And this, of course, will lead to that impairment of functioning. And this is what may distinguish something from collecting or just getting behind to actual slipping more into a hoarding disorder, is this impairment of functioning that people notice. And something that as technology improves, we may continue to see an increase in the digitalization of hoarding, and something that may be talked about more and more. This, like most types of hoarding, can occur on a continuum, and we know more research is needed on this condition in general, and especially when it comes to information and digital hoarding. So this is something, if you've ever been to a presentation of mine on hoarding in the past, which I've given quite a few. I think this is somewhere around my maybe 19th or 20th year presenting for the IOCDF. And oftentimes hoarding has so many negative concepts attached to it. And so people will often say, oh, it's such a sick behavior. So I've kind of reframed that a little bit. So are you sick? Sick meaning sensitive, intelligent, creative, and kind, because these are the characteristics that I so oftenly see when I'm working with people struggling with hoarding disorder. And I would say especially intelligent when we're looking at information or digital hoarding. Like I said, I've been doing this work for a really long time. I've met hundreds and hundreds of individuals struggling with hoarding and digital hoarding. And I got to say, they're some of my favorite clients that I've worked with, and I'm very, very impressed by these sensitive, intelligent, creative, and kind individuals that I have the privilege to work with. So what information is gathered and saved? So this is hard copy items. And this doesn't include everything, but just to give you the idea. So looking at, this is more information maybe than the digital, but books, printed articles, magazines, brochures, newspapers, calendars, notes. And if you go back a little ways, maybe some VHS tapes or cassette tapes, maybe even 8 tracks, vinyl. But these are things that oftentimes people save, and we'll talk about some of those reasons in just a little bit. Now, when it comes to digital hoarding on the computer, excessive saving of emails, excessive research, bookmarks, tabs, icons, articles, videos, photos, and I'll talk a little bit more about that too. Photos being one that we tend to see a lot of emotional attachment with. Documents, files, software, social media, right? So looking at Pinterest and Facebook and all these different ways to gather and collect information. Phone and other data storage devices. So things like pictures, videos, apps, music, reminders, calling others. And this is something too that we see a lot with obsessive compulsive disorder, but people reaching out for reassurance, not being able to tolerate that feeling of not knowing or completely knowing, having some uncertainty, and maybe reaching out to others, asking others, what do you think about this? Do you know about this? And gathering feedback from other people. Text messages, excessive saving of those, podcasts. These are a few different areas that we see with digital or hoarding on maybe phone or other devices. On our televisions, as our televisions get smarter, we're also going to see an increase of information that's going to be stored on them as well. So already looking at movies and shows and lots of potential sources to gather information there. Why is this information gathered and saved? So, and this is something that is also, and I don't know if you guys can see my screen here or not. I hope so. Why is this information gathered and saved? One thing that we have to look at is belief systems, looking at what are the thoughts that people have behind their need to acquire and save information. And sometimes, often, I'll say, it has to do with some perfectionism. Feeling like I need to know this, I need to understand this, is something that people will oftentimes continue to be a reason why people will accumulate this type of information. Seeing information as an opportunity is also a reason why people tend to acquire and save information. It may be a belief system that it's an expectation of this. More in obsessive compulsive disorder, it's called moral scrupulosity. This feeling that I should just know this as a good human being, right? So I should keep this because it's the right thing to do. What would my neighbor with heart disease think if I threw away this brochure on heart disease? I need to keep this. I need to get this to them, and finding some sort of value in that. And this is something that's been talked about, and I guess it's a couple points down here, but I'll jump to it. Looking at values, looking at why do people save this information and acquire this information, and looking at the different values. So it may have a use or a purpose, like an instrumental value. It may have sentimental value. It means something to them. It reminds them of a memory, or they have some attachment. We'll talk about in a little bit more detail in a second. Or it could be something too that that is just interesting, right? Intrinsic value is something else that we see oftentimes with possession hoarding, and that kind of crosses over into digital or information hoarding as well. Emotional avoidance is something that we see oftentimes with hoarding behavior, not really wanting to experience some of the difficult emotions that are involved with sorting this information, categorizing it, making decisions, letting some of this information go can be really uncomfortable. Taking the time to do that is something that people oftentimes do not want to do. I'm just going to jump on the chat real quick and make sure that everything is working here. Okay, good. It looks like we're working. So emotional avoidance is a big deal. And the reason why we don't change so many behaviors, because change is hard. Unfortunately, staying the same is also hard. And that's why we're all here, is to look at some ways and give ourselves that little boost, some more reasons to engage in this change process. We'll talk about that a little bit more when we discuss treatment. Difficulty with decision making is something that is very commonly experienced with people struggling from information and digital hoarding as well. So having a hard time deciding or determining the value of items. So looking at things and saying, oh, I really want to read this article. Oh, I really want to read this article too. Oh, let me read this article as well. And all of these, and we're all guilty of this, again, occurs on a continuum. But being able to gather and gather and gather and gather, and sometimes without determining the importance of things or the value of things. And that's where we really have to ask ourselves, like, how much do I really need this information? Because there's so much to gather now for the information that's out there. It's really impressive, right? And our intentions are good. We want to improve ourselves, improve our circumstances, learn some cool stuff. But we get so bogged down that we oftentimes don't get to those things. We'll talk about that a little bit more when we get to consequences as well. Research, right? We're all doing our own research. Now, whether we're a professional researcher or not, we all have our interests and things that we like to look at. I have tons of nerdy interests and things that I love learning about, in addition to my job and the great work that I get to do with people. And so we want to look at, what am I researching? There's so much out there. We oftentimes do need to put parameters on that. And I'll talk about that a little bit when I get to treatment. Now, the problem when we struggle from digital or information hoarding is that now a lot of people who are not as sick, sensitive, intelligent, creative, or kind, they have their research areas or interests. Most people who struggle with digital or information hoarding, that is a much wider scope. Lots of interest, lots of potential, lots of wanting to learn, wanting to gather more, which can get us into trouble. So research or interests, entertainment and behavioral patterns. So sometimes it's just fun to get lost in this and to spend time engaged in research and planning and gathering a little bit more before we make that decision. So we want to look at what some of our behavioral patterns are, sometimes just how we spend our day, or what we oftentimes refer to as behavioral psychologists, sequencing. So how do I start my day? So do I get up and do I jump on the computer right away? Do I start gathering information? Am I managing my photos or taking more? How much time am I spending with this? And what do I just kind of autopilot do? A lot of people, when they walk into the bathroom, they grab their phone or computer and bring it with them, right? These are all things that people just kind of automatically build into their day. They don't even think about it. So it's good. And as part of treatment, we take a look at some of these patterns, and we'll talk about that as well. Emotional attachment, which if you just attended the research presentation, there was some discussion on attachment and how important this is with the hoarding of possessions. And I think it's really interesting as we do more research on digital hoarding and information hoarding, what we notice with emotional attachment to this type of item that's being acquired as well. There has been a little research on this, and there can be more emotional attachment to certain types of items than others. Like I mentioned before, we might see a little bit more emotional attachment to things like photographs. But I'll tell you, working with people from over 21 years, I have a lot of people who are very emotionally attached to research articles and other types of information, books, things like that they've acquired. And that may also reflect their identity. I've had people over the years that are like, oh, if I get rid of this information, I feel like my IQ is going to drop, or I've lost an aspect of myself by letting go of this information. So it can represent identity. This feeling of responsibility. I'm responsible for archiving this data, right? I have the best collection of information on this topic. And so having that feeling, again, this kind of moves a little maybe into scrupulosity for some folks as well, but this hyper responsibility to be the librarian, to be the person who's responsible for this information, whether you share it with anybody else or just keep it to yourself. Memory may be another reason why people continue to accumulate or save this type of information. And I like to think about this in two different ways. One, maybe the expectations that people put on their memory, that I need to remember all this stuff. So, or I need to save this because I won't remember this stuff. Right. So if I can't read a newspaper, beginning to end without remembering the information, I better save the newspaper. Now, there isn't anybody, or not many people, that remember every word that they've read beginning to end. But sometimes that's the expectation that people put on their memory when they struggle with hoarding. There are some folks that may struggle with some memory impairment, but oftentimes we do find that it's more of an expectation that people put on their memory, or they're just flooded with so much information, they're not going to be able to remember all of it. They're holding too much up here or in their device that it isn't as easy to access, which is also a very interesting thing to maybe look at and research ahead. So expectations that people have on their memory overload, things like that might be contributing factors. And then there's this last item here, and this is just a brief summary. We only have an hour and a half, folks, or an hour and 15 minutes. But there's a lot more to discuss on this slide, and I could go on for a long, long time talking about these reasons. But hopefully this gives you some insight, maybe into your own behavior, or your client's behavior, or your family members' behavior. The last one is experience of fully knowing. And this is, in general, having a low tolerance for a feeling of incompleteness. So for example, if I was reading an article and I want to be looking at it and I just took it away right away. So I'm not quite done reading that sentence, or I'm not quite done completing that. Would that make me uncomfortable? Now, some folks with information or digital hoarding, that's very uncomfortable. That could be what's called an exposure exercise, and we'll talk about treatment in a little bit. But to be able to have that feeling of incompleteness, or having something that they want to read and deciding to discard it or shred it, ooh, it's going to sting a little, right? So, or wanting to research something but not doing it. So typing into your browser what you want to look at, but not hitting enter to actually get to that point. These are all exposure exercises, and we'll talk about that. But oftentimes, what happens with information and digital hoarding is this wild goose chase to try to find that experience of fully knowing. Much like with OCD, the feeling, for instance, if I have contamination OCD, that I need to wash my hands, and maybe I'll get some temporary relief, but that feeling will come back, that feeling of, but are my hands really clean? Better wash them again. And that happens with digital hoarding as well, where people are like, but do I really have all the information on that? Do I have enough information to actually make a good decision? And this is where we start to get into that perfectionism as well. So that experience of fully knowing, or that quest to gather, is oftentimes a reason why people continue with information gathering and saving. Okay. So here's some random facts. So somewhere, these just from a fun website, so norton.com. So on average, we spend 34 to 44 years of our life staring at screens, which we're all, accumulating some points right now, right? As we do these webinars and things like that. On average, people have 83 bookmarks, 7 open tabs in their browser, 15 unread emails. I'm way more than that, by the way. And if you've ever emailed me, you know the delay. 13 unused phone apps, 582 saved cell phone pictures, 2 unused or broken cell phones, 20 desktop icons, 209 gigabytes of cloud storage, 654 gigabytes of external storage, and 4 external hard drives, right? So these are averages. And this is where it might be good to kind of take a step back and ask yourself, where do you fall, right? So where are you at with some of these tendencies that we notice? And as our technology just continues to go in the direction that it is, those numbers are only going to go up likely in several of those areas. All right. This is also interesting, and this kind of gets into consequences a little bit. So there is an environmental consequence to digital hoarding, and this is it. All data centers in America consumed 2% of all electricity consumed nationwide. So this was a 2016 study. During the pandemic, I'd be curious to see how much more electricity people maybe consumed with this type of data storage and this type of hoarding behavior. And that's another really interesting thing as well. Looking at attachment, looking at the impact of the pandemic, the amount of time that people have spent on digital forms, media, research, things like that. Did that have an impact? I don't know. I'm guessing probably. Why to declutter your mind, computer, and phone? And this is really important. And if you attended any of the talks on motivation, you'll understand that this is an important exercise. And everybody's pros and cons are going to be a little bit different. But these were just a few things that that I was able to come up with. So we want to look at what are the pros and cons in change. So some pros, not just gathering, but doing. This is a big one. I see so many people waiting to live their life, waiting to make a decision on what kind of home security they use, or what kind of microwave to buy, or what sofa they should get for their living room, or but people oftentimes don't get to the doing because they're too busy gathering. What type of conversation, where they want to go on vacation, gather, and never get around to doing, or by the time we get around to doing it, it's a little late sometimes, or sometimes if there's other people involved, they've lost interest, or if it's work related, they might have moved on to something else. And so that can be a really good pro to changing this behavior so that we get to doing a lot sooner in life. And we're able to accumulate more experiences rather than just the gathering. Finding what we need. Golly, that's nice, right? So being able to actually find that article when we need it, finding that piece of information when we need it is nice, or finding that photograph. So being able to decrease the amount of digital or physical clutter really helps to make things more accessible to us and more organized. Having a more balanced lifestyle. A lot of people who struggle with digital hoarding are spending a lot of time organizing their stuff, right? Organizing their digital stuff, organizing their magazines, their newspapers. A lot of folks that I work with, they spend all day with their stuff, trying to organize it, trying to sort it. And they're not living their life in other ways, which is tragic to me because I really, really enjoy my clients. You're depriving the world of yourselves. So we got to get you out there in life and make those connections. And we'll talk about that in just a little bit too when we talk about treatment. Enjoy the best. I always say to my clients, enjoy the best, let go of the rest. And that's also part of the thinning the herd, right? So you can tell I live in North Dakota, all the bison here. So thin the herd a little bit, enjoy the best. And because a lot of people with hoarding struggle with difficulty determining the relative value of items, I'll oftentimes encourage people to think about, okay, let's think about importance. I'll use precious metals as an example. Platinum's the best, right? So what are your platinum items? What are the most important pictures? What are the most important things to emails that you need to save? Things like that. Great, that's fine. We all have them. So those are your platinum items. What are your gold items? What are things that are also really, really important for you to have and to save? Great, save them, right? So make them accessible, make them usable. If you have a lot of platinum and gold, we might have to be careful with the silver, right? So silver's still good. There's nothing wrong with silver, but silver can really start to create that excess. So things that are maybe interesting or that we like, but not something that is absolutely necessary, like the platinum and the gold. So silver items are going to sting a little bit when you make some tough decisions about silver. So silver might be things that you do delete, or you let go of another way. You donate a book, for instance. There's aluminum. Aluminum's all right, but aluminum is something too. When we have a lot of platinum and gold and maybe a teeny bit of silver, aluminum's something too. It doesn't mean that it's bad, but it means it's getting into an excessive category. It's something that I haven't looked at. I've kept this research article for the last 10 plus years. I haven't read it. I haven't read it in the last 10 plus years. I'm probably not going to read it today. I'm probably not going to read it in the next 10 plus years. And so that's where we have to be honest with ourselves. We'll talk about that when we get into cognitive restructuring. And then we have rusty can. So rusty can is the types of information or items that maybe we're like, okay, I can do without that, right? So these are things that we're like, I got that book. It wasn't what I thought it was going to be. So I don't have an attachment to it in any way. And maybe that's a rusty can item. So that's an important thing too. So because when we get rid of some of the silver, the aluminum, and the rusty can, then we can really enjoy our platinum and gold items. Improve decision making. This is a skill. You may not be that good at it. All right, it's okay. You can practice, and that's what a therapist will help you do, is looking at those decision making abilities and being able to practice some of that decision making and looking at what's getting in the way for you for being able to make those decisions. Decreased anxiety, fear, and distractibility are all pros. Like, we don't want that. We don't want that anxiety, fear, and distractibility. These two are things that can be improved upon with the skills taught in therapy. Improved relationships. This is kind of I think one of the most tragic parts of hoarding disorder, and whatever form it comes in, is how relationships are oftentimes stressed or severed because of this behavior, or they never happened in the first place, which is also tragic. It kept people from making those social contacts to begin with. And the last is improved self-esteem. Are some pros that I see oftentimes in working with folks with these conditions. Being able to really feel good about life, have some of those adventures, get to done on a lot of things, or I'll refer to Elvis Presley, taking care of business, right? So being able to take care of business, do what you need to do, that really helps to build self-esteem as well, and a feeling of mastery. Some cons of change. This hard work, right? So just like these Olympic athletes, they've worked so hard. It's going to be easier than being an Olympic athlete. I can pretty much promise you that, but it's going to take some hard work. It's going to take some emotional discomfort, but it's okay. We get that emotional discomfort. We learn how to tolerate it more through this process of change in therapy. Life adjustment. Life adjustments are always difficult, but this is one that's going to very likely lead to some positive change. Another con is learning how to tolerate that feeling of risk, learning how to sit with that feeling of not fully knowing. But that too does get easier, but it does mean some temporary discomfort oftentimes. Oops. Okay. Isn't this cute? Letting go of knowing and step into being. I love that. I think I'm going to use that as a title for like a book or an article or something. And I love this cartoon. Where he's and then the cows, some holy man, dude's got it all backwards. So I hope you're chuckling right now looking at that, because I know I certainly did the first time that I saw that cartoon. And this is where we get into some other skills and things too. Don't worry, therapists on here, I'm gonna go to the CBT things. But I do think that this is such good information to know. Learning a little bit about mindfulness, learning maybe a little bit about guided meditation. A lot of folks who have a very busy mind might be there's so many different types of meditation, but if you have a very busy mind, you might have a difficult time just sitting and practicing mindfulness or doing some kind of meditation. But if it's guided, it might give you a way to kind of stay focused. And that will improve attention and concentration as well. Research has shown that, as well as decreasing depression and anxiety and things that are oftentimes experienced for people struggling with hoarding. Expand your mind through awareness training, right? So how cool is that? We have nothing to lose, but much to gain. So I'm going to talk a little bit about treatment now. I'm just going to peek at my clock. We're doing good on time. And I will try to save some time at the end too for some questions. So we'll see how we do. Because it's really important to understand that treatment is multifaceted. There's no one size fits all treatment model. So it does have to be individualized. So here are a few things about cognitive behavioral therapy for information and digital hoarding. So I'm a cognitive behavioral therapist, big B, so heavy on the behavioral side of things, although I do value other types of therapy as well, and am trained in integrative psychotherapy. So, but oftentimes we need to, or if not always, start with a good functional behavioral assessment, taking a look at the ABCs. The ABCs are the antecedents, what happened before, what are the triggers, the behavior itself, how does the behavior manifest, what does it look like, and the C, the consequences. So antecedents, behaviors, consequences are all part of a good functional assessment. There are assessment measures that we can use too to see where people fall on a continuum of this behavior. Like I said, it does occur on a continuum. So looking at severity level is important. Looking at degree of awareness. I used to run groups years ago and I do pre and post measures. And on the pre-measures, I'd have a lot of folks who really, I don't have a hoarding problem. I'm here because I've got a picky neighbor, right? So, and that's where they started in the group. And then toward the end of group, they were like, oh yeah, actually I do have maybe a bit of a hoarding problem, right? So we were able to move them from a stage of, and I'll talk about this with motivation, but a stage from pre-contemplation, I don't have a problem, it's everyone else's problem, to kind of preparation, maybe I have a problem. All right. So we want to assess somebody's degree of awareness. So in my groups, sometimes I'd have some folks who didn't have very much awareness at all. But then as the process went on in group, they gained more awareness. Some of their treatment measures looked like they got worse because they were like, nope, not a problem. And at the end, oh, actually a problem. But that was because they became more aware of their behavior. And so that's something to assess as well. Or insight, oftentimes that's referred to. And observation, what a great tool. Observe, right? Observe yourself, observe your family. If you're a therapist, observe your client. And a few other presenters have talked about this as well. Now, if you are going into a therapist's office, or you're a therapist, if you are seeing clients in your office, I still am here in North Dakota, hopefully for a little while longer anyway. To be able to observe, how do people do in your office, bringing items in, right? So what does it look like when they're making those decisions? What does it look like when you watch them on the computer? What does it look like when you give them an article and you're like, and put it down? And now we're going to tear up the article, right? What's the reaction? What's the feeling that goes along with that? That's a good tool of observation. That's how good science is done, right? So, so we don't want to miss out on that. I actually just did a home visit on Friday with a client too, and it was so useful to observe, to watch her in action as she was going through and trying to make some decisions about her stuff. Understanding reinforcement patterns is something that's also really, really important. So, so we want to look at what's reinforcing this behavior. So what do you get out of this behavior? So it's something that we really want to be able to pay attention to here. What do you like about it? What do you enjoy? And that's important. What is the positive reinforcement of it? So what are you getting as a result of it? And what are you trying to avoid as a result of continuing to acquire, continuing to save? So, and this is called negative reinforcement. So by not having to deal with some of those icky emotions, might be a reason why people are avoiding, not having to really make decisions. If I just keep it. Cognitive restructuring is also a really important component of treatment. Being able to identify, challenge, and replace unhelpful thoughts is a really important thing for people to do. So we want to be able to utilize that, be able to kind of shut off autopilot a little bit and to be more aware of what am I doing and what am I telling myself about that. So if I'm looking up just one more article, or I'm not quite ready to buy that yet, let me research, let me look at Consumer Reports. What are the thoughts behind that? What are the emotions behind that? These are things that are important with cognitive restructuring. And again, identify, challenge, and replace. The first step of like everything in therapy, it sounds easy, but to actually put it into practice is a whole nother ballgame here. So identify, slow down a little bit. Identify, what am I telling myself? That's huge. If we can just get a little distance from our mind rather than just going on autopilot all the time, but to catch ourselves, that's already such a big part of the equation and such an important thing to be able to do. Challenge the thought. Is it true? Is a really important question. Is it helpful to continue to have that thought? And is there any other way to think about this that might help to decrease my digital or information hoarding? That's a little bit about cognitive restructuring. Exposure and response prevention. And honestly, this is the meat, I think, of treatment in treating hoarding disorder in all the different ways that it presents itself, and certainly with digital and information hoarding. What we're doing here is we're building emotional tolerance to that feeling of incompleteness, the feeling of just good enough, the actual making of decisions and not acquiring something when we really, really want to. So we're building tolerance to that. So I live in North Dakota. I'm not from here originally. And my first January living in North Dakota was rough. I didn't have tolerance yet to the temperature. I've now been here 11 years, which I can't believe it's been that long. Time goes fast. But 11 years later, as I go into January and I walk outside and it's 10 below, if the sun's shining, I usually don't even need a hat. So, because I've learned to tolerate. We learn how to tolerate so many things. Humans are the most adaptable creatures on earth. We can learn how to tolerate and adapt to change and breaking out of these patterns. We want to be able to do this in a systematic way. So we want to build a hierarchy, the same way that we stand up to any kind of fear, phobia, obsessive compulsive disorder. We don't just jump right in and do the most difficult thing. We build up to that. Again, just like the Olympic athletes. I used to be a gymnast. I didn't jump on the balance beam and do a backflip day one, right? So it's something that actually I never got to that. But it's something that you look at these things and you do it very gradually along the way. Just learn how to walk on the balance beam, and once you practice that, you're going to get better at it. Then you're going to be ready to go to the next step and the next step, right? So learn how to do a leap on the beam. These are things that it just takes practice. And just like gymnastics, we're going to fall down sometimes. We're going to make some mistakes. We gather information on where did we get stuck? Where did it go wrong? And how do I modify that for a better outcome moving forward? So that's exposure. Response prevention is don't undo the exposure. So I used to run a treatment group. Sorry, I could talk about this all day. I'm watching the clock. I used to run therapy groups for hoarding. And it was so much fun. They were usually from 7 to 9. I can't remember what day of the week, Wednesdays or something. And usually I'd wrap up in my office, 10:30 p.m., walk out, and everybody'd still be in the parking lot all the time, visiting, having a good time. But in those groups, we had an exercise called purgatory table, which I think Randy Frost and Gail Steckity coined that term, and I think it's brilliant. And so, and with that, people would bring in an item, and then they'd make a decision about that item. They could keep it, but put an expiration date on it. They could donate the item, and I had a donate pile in my office, or they could discard the item, and I had a trash can in the group room. So, and people could decide what to do. Well, I learned over time, some of the items that were put in the trash, when I walked out at 10:30 at night and carried the trash bag and waved at all my group members and then tossed it in the dumpster and drove off, sometimes people would go back in and dumpster dive, retrieve the item that they brought to group, or retrieve an item another person brought to group. That was a no-no, right? So that's not response prevention. Response prevention is go outside, adjust to the 10 below weather, and get used to it. The other analogy is jumping into a cold pool. If we jump right back out again, we're not going to habituate. That emotional tolerance won't develop. So we got to get out there, do the tough thing, stick with it, and we'll adjust, right? So just like going into the cold pool. So I learned I didn't throw things in the dumpster after group anymore, just to help people with that response prevention exercise. Okay, a little bit more, and there's been other talks about this, so I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but motivational interviewing is something too, especially if you're struggling a little bit. If you're in the, it's not my problem, it's everyone else's problem stage, it's called pre-contemplation. That's okay. It's a place to start. But we have to assess that. Where are people at in their stage of change? So there's pre-contemplation. I don't have a problem, it's everyone else's problem. Contemplation, maybe there's a little problem there, but I'm not ready to do anything about it. Preparation, okay, I have a problem here, and let me look on the IOCDF website and see if there's any therapists in my area who treat this. There's action, I'm showing up for therapy, I'm doing the homework, right? And then there's maintenance. So I've gotten through therapy and I'm maintaining the gains that I have. So those are some stages of change. Assessing values that people have. I talked about that a little bit earlier. Motivational interviewing also includes empathy and empowerment. These are really important things. Most people have gotten so frustrated with themselves because they spent so much time trying to do this process, but they just didn't have the tools. So, I mean, sometimes we get lucky and we find some things that work along the way, but we don't have to, reinvent the wheel here. There are therapists who are trained to treat these things. Luckily, more and more of them, especially from where I started 20 plus years ago to where it is now. It's great to see how this field has grown. We still got work to do. Don't get me wrong, there's still plenty to do. Plenty of therapists who need training out there, but it's going in the right direction. Limit setting is also important. Setting limits to acquisition. How are things coming in the first place, right? What is being gathered? Setting limits to what's been saved already. Setting limits on the time that's spent acquiring and managing digital stuff, information stuff. Developing an organizational plan is also really important to this process. And so we want to take a look at where do we start? Most people are so overwhelmed. So just like we would with helping somebody declutter a house or an apartment, we start in a target area, and we can do that digitally as well. So getting a hierarchy in place, talking about where we're going to start with people, having a plan is a really important thing. We're not walking into this blind. We're walking into this with a plan. So we do the functional assessment. We talk about what we think is going to be most helpful. We do some skills training. When we have the luxury, sometimes we have to do emergency cleanups, and we don't have the luxury. We have to do the therapy after the cleanup process, which isn't ideal, but it happens. But when we can, we pick a target area, and that might be emails, right? That might be bookmarks. So that might be, this area of research. That might be books in a certain room, in a certain part of the room. We establish categories, simple categories, usually 3 to 5 categories: save, discard, donate, depending on what we're organizing. Having some commitment goals to say, I'm working on this until I complete this much, or I'm working on this for the next 15 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 45 minutes. I always say I sound like an infomercial, or I've had people clean their entire house working no more than 45 minutes a day. But that's true. It takes a while sometimes, but when that's all that people can do and they're maxed out, and at a certain point that they're just save, well, we might have to decrease the amount of time that we're spending, build that skill up until people are able to do more. Again, in emergency cleanups, we don't always have that luxury, or high risk situations. Resist churning, just like we have to do that with possessions. We have to do that with information and digitalized information as well. So we can't just, yeah, I don't want to, I'm going to close that folder. Let's open this one. No, I'm going to, let's just move this over here, right? So we can't just move things around in real space or cyberspace. We have to actually make decisions here. That's where the good stuff happens. That's where we develop our skills. Maintenance. So what we're doing with maintenance, we notice the positives of the change that we're making. We're developing a plan and accountability, and building, I always say building emotional muscles, right? So when we build those emotional muscles, we don't suffer as much. So I don't suffer as much when I go out in the winter in North Dakota anymore. I'm kind of used to it, right? I've gotten better. I've built my tolerance. You'll build your tolerance for these types of decisions and things along the way too. And further skills development is something that's also really important. Where is therapy done? So it could be done in the office. It could be done in vivo. In vivo means like on location. So like I said, I just did a therapy session on Friday with somebody in their home. I've been to people's workplace. I've been in stores with people. I've had people practice, coming into my office and using my computer and resisting acquiring information. I've been at their home and they're on their computer practicing resisting gathering information. Telehealth is something that most of us, I've done telehealth for a long time, but something that never as much as what I've done in the last year and a half. I'm still doing some of that. About 40% of my practice is still telehealth. But something that can also be really helpful. You can see your client's environment, work on that. Sometimes people have difficulties accessing or even having computer or getting things to work, kind of like we did today at the beginning of the talk. So sometimes it'll be over the phone. Homework is a big place where therapy needs to get done. So this is not something that your therapist can do for you, or that a family member can do for you. Cleaning a digital world or physical world does not fix hoarding behavior. It's acquiring the skills to do so on your own is what changes this behavior. Other important considerations for a successful outcome, really something that I think is so important is being able to develop these interpersonal skills. So, and forming these connections with other people. This is something that over the years of treating hoarding that I've done so much more with. And I think it's important. Meeting with family members, chatting with family members, coming together as a team to say, okay, we're all here to support this person struggling with hoarding. If that person, the person struggling from hoarding, whether it's possession hoarding, digital hoarding, animal hoarding, it's being able, if they don't have those relationships, trying to find a community for people. Even if we're a little more introverted, most people, even introverts, oftentimes need some sort of social connectedness. And so or skills. And so it's being able to work with folks on those interpersonal skills, on those connections. I just had a woman in my office this last week, and she has struggled with hoarding for a very, very long time. And it created a really strong division between her and her children. And the most powerful, the best part of the treatment is that we've been able to save that relationship. So, and we've been able to put some parameters around what's discussed and how much, what's helpful, what's not helpful. And so that's been one of the most rewarding things, is to see families come together again, or to see people who maybe don't have families join communities and organizations. I wrote an article on digital and information. I think it was just called Information Hoarding, the Need to Know and Remember. For the IOCDF, I think it was in 2006. It was a while ago. And that was after giving a talk like this one at the conference. And in that article, I talked about a client that I worked with around that time. She was a wonderful woman, but she really didn't have a lot of family and friends. And so it was something that, and she had a tendency to hoard books. And so she loved that kind of information. She loved learning about adventurous things and being outdoors and all these fun environmental facts. And she enjoyed consuming this information, but her life was really limited. She wasn't really living it. So she was gathering, but not doing. And so what we did is we started doing, and she was able to join an outdoors club and really started making some nice friendships and having those interpersonal relationships, which was huge in being able to let go then of what she was gathering, because now she was doing. It was a perfect replacement behavior. And that's something that's really important. Having fun is a really important thing. So many of my folks who struggle with hoarding are so much fun, can be very eccentric, lovely individuals, brilliant individuals. Like I said, share yourself with others. So quit holding out. So I think that it's really important to have fun. It's really important to enjoy your life, share your talents with other people. Building self-esteem. By developing skills, you develop mastery. When we develop mastery, we get better at things. We tend to feel better about ourselves. And so it's being able to look at, where are we getting caught? Where are the hiccups along the way? And how do we change that? And then the last thing is discover replacement behaviors, like the example that I just gave you of finding the outdoors clubs, right? So connecting with other people, connecting with real experience is something that also is a really important factor in maintaining success for people. All right, and we are doing great on time, which is hard to believe because I had so much that I wanted to cover. I do have an exercise, as promised, in the kind of summary of this. So, and then that'll give us a little bit of time. How are we doing? We have a little bit of time to practice this. So practice time. I love this image too of, releasing the butterflies, right? So this came from this website, of letting go. So letting go of this quest to keep gathering, letting go of some of the information that we're holding, and to start being able to sort things out. So here's what I propose, and what I'd like you to do. And I'm going to try to stop. Well, no, maybe I'll keep my screen up. So what I'd like to do is to have you pick something. All right. So pick an item. And again, don't go for the Olympic marathon item, right? So go for something that's maybe a little bit easier, but something that maybe is going to make you challenge yourself a wee bit anyway. So pick something in your environment, pick some, item of information around you, or I know all you are sitting in front of your computers right now. So see if there's something on your computer that you can let go of. See if there's a photo that you can delete. See if there's an email that you can let go of. So spend just a couple of minutes, maybe even just organizing something that you have, and make a real decision about it. Am I going to keep this and use it? Is it platinum or gold, right? So, or is it silver, aluminum, or rusty can, and I maybe need to let it go? And those are important things that I'd like you to try to do here as you go through this process. So, so let's just take a minute or two, and I'd like you to And I will stop sharing my screen and go back to this and take a look at some of the chat. After this exercise, then what I want to do is maybe in the chat, share what your experience looked like if you feel comfortable. And then we can talk about that. And then I'll take some basic, well, not basic, but just general question and answers afterwards, because I see that there's been a lot of chat along the way and a lot of Q&A. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'd like you guys to all practice this exercise of digital decluttering, actually making a decision, actually learning to tolerate some of these feelings and thoughts, and see if you can observe, see what you notice. And then I'm going to get the slides to stop here. All right. And hopefully you guys are all practicing. I wish I could see you right now so I know if you're doing it or not. I can only see myself, which is a little boring, I have to say. But see if you can go through, see if you can do an email, see if you can discard some information around or make a decision around it. Put an expiration date to it if you can't let it go yet, to say, okay, I'm really going to read this. All right. Write an expiration date on top. So if you do it by that date, great. If you don't, hasta la vista. All right. So it's something that it's really important to set those limits for yourself. All right, good job. I'm seeing some information coming in of people who have deleted a photo from their phone, things like that. Now, as you do this, pay attention. What are the thoughts that I'm having? So, what am I thinking of? And as we do this, we are giving ourselves better access to our platinum and gold. We're increasing our cybersecurity by letting go of some of this excess information that's been sitting there, which who knows what it's all attached to. And so it's really, look at you guys, I deleted 5 to 10 emails. Woo, woo. So I think this is great. So, and if you feel the sting, if it hurts a little bit, good for you. That's exactly how it should feel. So now I don't want you having a panic attack. That's too hard. That's doing a backflip on the balance beam. So I just want you walking on the balance beam, low beam. Okay. Maybe mid beam if you have a little practice with this. So, and this is something that it takes a little bit of practice to get into these things. Look at you guys, deleted unneeded videos from my phone. They take up lots of space. That's so true. Your devices will improve their performance as you let go of these things as well. So deleted 6 pics. That's great. Deleted some emails. Everybody's doing fantastic. Some drawings, unsubscribed from text alerts, deleted several hundred square invoices. Woohoo! Deleted some photos, threw away. Wow. Oh, emails from Domino's. See you, Domino's. It's not good for you anyway. Sorry. I'm gonna get sued by Domino's. So I think that's wonderful. It's actually pretty easy. You're gonna see what else I can do to unsubscribe from. Good for you. In psychology, these are called behavioral experiments, right? So, and just as we're doing right now, we're experimenting. We're seeing, how did that feel, right? How did I do with that? So I'm not just moving things around. I'm not avoiding it. Often, as we stand up to fears and uncomfortable emotions, what we find is that anticipatory anxiety, anticipatory feelings of regret or loss are often worse than the actual experience of doing. So it's good to challenge ourselves. So you guys are doing fantastic. I'm so proud of you. Really challenging yourself. So That's great. And I love how you're supporting each other too. That's a great component of group, and something that I really miss doing in person. I really miss seeing you all in person. So I think that it's so much fun to be able to go through this process and share this information with you. Now, usually I don't provide a handout for this talk because it just adds to the problem. However, I did just with a little bit of not wanting to, I did end up sharing the slides. So those will be on the website later. And my contact information is also there. I'm super easy to find. If you just Google my name, you'll find me. Otherwise, the name of my practice is Lakeside Center, and it's lakesidecenter.org. If you have any specific questions outside of this talk and want to reach out. You guys are doing great. I love all these comments. I love all the work that you're doing. So, okay, well, we better start shifting gears here a little bit. I did want to give about 10 minutes at the end for some other questions. And so, we have a lot on the Q&A. So there's not a chance I'm going to be able to go through and get to all of this information. And I apologize, but guess what? That's a great exposure. You have to sit with that uncertainty of not knowing. So there you go. There's an exposure exercise for you right there. So, but let me go to the Q&A and open that. Bear with me for a minute. Even though I give this talk on digital hoarding, I'm not really great with technology. Okay. Why is it defined as pertaining to data, et cetera, of limited perceived value when the definition of regular hoarding now pertains to items regardless of value? Yeah, I think that's a better way to define it. So regardless of the value, because I think that it is something that to other people looking at what you have, they may not see value in it. But you probably saved it or kept it because it had some sort of perceived value. So that is something that can be changed with that working definition. How do you suggest we organize all this stuff? Some is very important, unfortunately, mixed with everything else. Yes, that happens all the time where things that are truly important, the rusty can is mixed with the platinum and the gold, right? So, so starting with that organizational system, starting with, like these target areas, and that could be a target area on your computer, a target area on your phone, a target time to help cut down on some of those feelings of overwhelm, because you're probably not going to get it all done today. All right. So, or this weekend, or in the next week, or in the next month. So oftentimes when I work with people where hoarding is a significant issue for them, it takes a little bit of time. So for people to really start to develop these skills, develop the tolerance to do the work that's necessary. And depending on how big of a job that you have, depending on how much you have. I've had people that have done a 6-week group, and that was great. That's all they needed. And I have other people that I've worked with for years. So it really varies. That's why it's never a one size fits all treatment model, in my opinion. I have over 64,000 emails. It's not that I want to keep them all, but then yeah, a lot of times we do. And when we have that much, it's easy to get overwhelmed, right? So, and that's where it's being able to decide where, yeah, I did close my screen. So, and that's where I think that it's important to go over, like, where do we start? How do you break this down a little bit? And is that the best use of your time, going through the 64,000 emails, or is there other places that maybe you get the most bang for your buck in being able to reduce some of this digital or physical clutter? Okay, some of this is IT stuff, I think. During this conference, people kept putting links in the chat and Q&A session while the speakers were speaking. All I could do was open each one and save it as a bookmark file. I call clutter. What should I have done? Well, that's where it's tough because you're not going to be able to assess what's, save the best and get rid of the rest, but you're going to have to sit with some uncertainty. So, and don't let it sit. So because if we're like, okay, conference over, which it will be in just a few minutes, right? So now if you're not going to do it now, if you're not going to do it in the next, few minutes, you're probably not going to do it tomorrow, and you're probably not going to do it next week. And so spend a little time looking at those tabs, decide what's your platinum and gold, and things that you're like, nah, that doesn't really pertain to me, delete, right? So, and let it go with that feeling of risk. But what if I need that in the future? It's being able to say, well, I may or may not be able to find it in the future again. And being able to be okay with that is ultimately what we're trying to do here with exposure. Okay, my contact information is lakesidecenter.org. Like I said, just literally Google my information. I'm on the IOCDF as well. Very easy to find. Dr. Renardi at lakesidecenter.org is my email. How might one identify digital hoarding? Are there rating scales or assessments that are useful? Well, I think that they could be tweaked. Some of the assessment tools that are out there to assess this. Now we have to standardize these measures to see, do they hold up as a reliable assessment tool? But I would say if it's causing you some distress, impairment, disorganization, it's going to be a good thing to work on. So that's always kind of my viewpoint. Okay. And let's see, do I have a handout or worksheet with the precious, non-precious metal categories? So yeah, I don't know if that's on anything. It might be on that article that I talked about earlier, but it doesn't have to be precious metals. It could be, think of it if you like flowers. If roses are your favorite flowers, roses are your platinum, right? Maybe you're not as big of a fan of lilies. Maybe you're allergic to them. They can be your your silver, aluminum, or rusty cans, or dandelions, right? So you can go through and use anything to help you kind of determine how important is this? What's the true value of this item? Is digital addiction related to this? That's an excellent question, and something that we really have to take a look at. And I think it starts to get a little difficult to pull these things apart. So I think looking at digital addiction, gaming addiction, things like that too, it can be a little tough to know where does hoarding tendencies kind of end? Where does addiction begin? Where does collecting begin and end? We're going to get a little bit more of a Venn diagram where these things intersect, right? So, but for some people, especially folks who have a tendency toward behavioral addictions, yeah, I think it's important to look at that. Have you seen flat out internet addiction among your clients? I have, and the treatment, doing the exposure, building the tolerance, things like that is also very helpful. What were the levels of importance? Okay, platinum, gold, silver, aluminum, rusty can are the categories that I tend to use. Okay. Oh, I hope some of you don't have a completely blank screen and then I'm back. But I did stop sharing my slides so that we could have a discussion. And then I'm not as distracted by my slides as well. There's nothing else left anyway. So that's again an exposure, sitting with that feeling of, was there more? Maybe. So that's another exposure for the day. Okay. So I think that brings us about to the end. I'm just going to open the chat here real quick and just see if I'm missing anything on there. Yes, and I'm glad somebody brought this up. I think that, and again, we need research on this, but a lot of folks will suffer from both digital hoarding and possession hoarding. And we're trying to kind of understand that. I would say when I first wrote the article in 2006 on this topic, there wasn't much, honestly. So now in the last few years, especially since like 2019, I've noticed more articles on this where people are, again, just starting to scratch the surface on this. But I'm excited to see that there's some work being done in the research world. We need more. But being able to understand the similarities and differences between people who struggle with information or digital hoarding, people who struggle from possession hoarding, obsessive compulsive disorder, attention deficit disorder, executive function difficulties, maybe autism. I think there's lots of things. So any grad students out there, you have a great thesis or dissertation, contact me, I'll help you. So I think that would be wonderful to get more research on this. So, and we are at the end of our time here. So if there's any other last minute questions, I will take them. Otherwise, my information again, and I'll type it in into, oh, maybe I can't. So I don't know if I can share that with you guys or not, but again, lakesidecenter.org. Dr. Renee Renardi at lakesidecenter.org is my email, or just Google me, you'll find me. I'm very easy. I am on the IOCDF website. If you look up North Dakota, I'm really easy to find because I think I'm one of only a few. And the others are probably my colleagues who work here in my office, therapists that work for me. So thank you so much. And I know this is the end of this conference. I hope that I brought a little bit of entertainment and energy into the tail end of things here. I'm really always excited to hear from you. If you have questions or things after the conference, if you're struggling, try to find a therapist in your area. If you live in a big state or there's a lot of traffic in your state, a lot of therapists are doing telehealth now too, which can improve access to care. So if you go to the iocdf.org website, you can get a link to find a therapist in your area. The IOCDF website also has great information on hoarding disorder that you can access as well. So I hope that gives you some things to think about, some things to challenge yourself with, to build some emotional muscle. And I think that brings us to the end of the talk. So great job, everybody. I do believe that this will be recorded. I did give permission to that. So it will be accessible later on. Maybe there's another exposure for you. So the slides will maybe be accessible to you later on if you need them, if they're platinum and gold to you. If they're not, don't look at them. So challenge yourself. Don't ever look at them again. Go on to being. Stop researching. Go live your life. So, all right. Well, you guys take care. I wish I was seeing you in person. I'm going to jump off now, and any questions, feel free to reach out. Bye-bye.